This story begins in the icy grip of winter, January 1959, deep in the Soviet Union. 10 young adventurers, students, and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a daring expedition into the northern Ural Mountains. At the helm was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his leadership, precision, and passion for the wild. The group he assembled shared his spirit, smart, experienced, and united by a love for adventure. They weren't amateurs. They had faced snow, wind, and wilderness before. This journey would earn them the highest grade of trekking certification in the Soviet mountaineering system. Their goal was Mount Ortorten, a remote peak cloaked in legend, whose name in the indigenous Mansi language means "don't go there." But these young explorers were undaunted. They packed their skis, maps, and journals and headed north, full of determination and joy. In the early stages, everything went as planned. Their diaries paint a vivid picture of warmth and friendship, laughing over meals, singing songs, posing for photos in the snow. They documented every step of the way with care and excitement. It was the kind of adventure they dreamed of. But not all of them would continue the journey. Just a few days in, Yuri Yudin, the 10th member, fell ill. Suffering from chronic pain and fatigue, he made the difficult decision to turn back. It was a painful goodbye, but a fateful one, because Yuri would become the last person to ever see the group alive. What followed next remains one of the most chilling and unexplained mysteries in modern history. Before we continue, if you're drawn to real-life mysteries and chilling unsolved cases, give this video a like and subscribe to Echo Case. We explore the darkest corners of history, where facts fade and questions remain. Now, let's return to the frozen slopes of the Ural Mountains. As the days passed, the group continued their ascent through thick forests and across frozen rivers. On February 1st, they made a critical decision, one that still puzzles researchers to this day. Instead of moving downhill to a more sheltered valley for the night, the group chose to pitch their tent on the exposed eastern slope of a mountain known as Kolatsiakol. In the native Mansi language, its name ominously means Mountain of the Dead. No one knows exactly why they chose that spot. Some believe they lost daylight and decided not to lose altitude. Others think they wanted to practice setting camp in harsh conditions. Whatever the reason, that would be the last time anyone ever heard from them. The hikers had planned to send a telegram to their sports club once they returned to the village of Vijay, expected around February 12th. But the date came and passed with no word. At first, no one panicked. Delays were common in expeditions of this kind. A snowstorm, an injury, a broken ski, any number of things could slow them down. But as the days turned into a week, unease turned into fear. Families started asking questions, friends grew anxious, and by February 20th, with still no communication, the university and eventually Soviet authorities were forced to take action. A search party was organized. At first, it consisted of volunteers, students, teachers, and mountain rescue enthusiasts who knew the team personally. Soon, the military joined the effort, bringing in helicopters, planes, and trained rescue personnel. The search crews braved brutal weather, freezing temperatures, and deep snowdrifts as they combed the vast, silent landscape of the Urals. All they had were maps, photos, and a haunting uncertainty. What happened to Igor Dyatlov and his group? The answer would come soon, but it would only raise more questions. On February 26, 1959, after days of grueling searching through wind and snow, a volunteer rescue team made a chilling discovery on the slopes of Kolatsiakol. They found the Dyatlov group's tent, but something was very wrong. The tent was still standing, partially collapsed under snow, but it had been ripped open from the inside. Long, vertical slashes tore through the canvas as if someone had desperately tried to escape. Their gear, Boots, jackets, even food was still inside, undisturbed. But the hikers were gone. Investigators were baffled. Why would 9 experienced mountaineers flee their shelter in the dead of night into -25-degree temperatures without proper clothing? Then they spotted footprints in the snow leading away from the tent. Some were barefoot, others showed only socks or a single shoe. The trail led down the slope toward the forest line, nearly a mile away. That's where the real horror began. Beneath a tall cedar tree at the edge of the forest, they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Georgy Doroshenko. They were lying side by side, dressed only in their underwear, no coats, no boots. Nearby, there were signs of a small fire, a desperate attempt to stay alive. Strangely, both men had burned hands and fingers, likely from leaning too close to the flames in freezing panic. Investigators scanned the snow between the cedar tree and the tent. Along that path, they discovered 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to crawl back to the tent inch by inch before succumbing to the cold. Slobodin's skull showed signs of trauma, a possible blow, but nothing immediately fatal. The cause of death in all 5? Hypothermia. But the story didn't end there. It wasn't until 2 months later, in May, when the snow finally began to melt, that searchers uncovered the final 4 bodies. They were found in a ravine over 70 meters from the cedar tree, buried under several meters of snow. These 4, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignals, were better dressed than the others. In fact, some of them were wearing pieces of clothing that belonged to their fallen companions, as if scavenged in desperation. But what truly shocked investigators were their injuries. Thibault-Brignals had a crushed skull. Zolotaryov and Dubinina both had multiple broken ribs, and Dubinina's tongue and part of her face was missing, a gruesome detail that fueled countless theories. Yet oddly, there were no external wounds consistent with a fall or animal attack. Soviet experts compared the trauma to a car crash, incredibly strong force, but internal. It was a scene no one could explain. A team of healthy, skilled hikers had fled their tent in a panic, scattered into the wilderness, and died in the most bizarre and terrifying ways. No enemies, no clear signs of struggle, just fragments of survival and silence. The Dyatlov Pass mystery had only just begun. As investigators examined the bodies of the 9 hikers, they uncovered disturbing and often contradictory details, clues that deepened the mystery rather than solved it. The first 2 bodies, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, were found beneath the cedar tree, nearly naked, barefoot, and huddled near the remains of a small fire. Their cause of death was clear, hypothermia, but they also showed minor burns on their hands and legs, as if they had been too close to the flames or perhaps were trying to keep warm in a frantic, uncoordinated state. The next 3 bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, were also determined to have died from hypothermia. But Rustem Slobodin had a fractured skull, consistent with a strong blow. Still, it was not considered fatal, and the official reports stated that none of these 3 had injuries severe enough to prevent movement. But it was the final 4 bodies, discovered 2 months later in the ravine, that revealed the most horrifying and unexplained injuries. Thibault-Brignals suffered a massive skull fracture. Zolotaryov and Dubinina had multiple broken ribs, some crushed completely inward. The force required to cause such trauma, according to Soviet forensic experts, would have had to be comparable to a car crash. And yet, there were no external wounds, no bruising, no lacerations, no visible marks that might explain such powerful internal damage. It's as if the pressure had come from inside or from a blunt force so evenly distributed it left no surface trace. The most haunting detail of all was the condition of Lyudmila Dubinina. Her body was missing her tongue, eyes, and portions of facial tissue. These were not clean surgical removals, but neither were they easily explained by animal predation. Many questioned whether she had sustained these injuries before death or after. As if that weren't strange enough, investigators discovered that some of the hikers' clothing, particularly garments worn by Dubinina and Zolotaryov, showed traces of radiation, slight but above normal levels. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints indicating outsiders were present, and no indication of weapons or foul play. Just silence, snow, and a tent slashed from the inside. Despite the brutal injuries, the initial investigation concluded that the group died from a combination of hypothermia and an unknown compelling force. No single theory seemed to fit all the evidence. And with each new detail, one thing became clear. Something terrified that group enough to send them fleeing into the freezing night. And something killed them in a way no one could fully explain. In the spring of 1959, Soviet authorities concluded their investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident. The official statement? The hikers died due to a compelling natural force. No further explanation, no follow-up. The case was quickly closed. But the silence only fed the storm of speculation that followed. Over the decades, researchers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists have proposed numerous theories, some grounded in logic, others steeped in mystery. One of the most discussed is the avalanche theory. The idea suggests that a sudden snowslide forced a group to flee in panic. But critics argue this doesn't hold up. There were no signs of a significant avalanche, and the tent, while snow-covered, was still partially upright. Plus, the injuries, especially crushed bones without external wounds, didn't match avalanche patterns. Another early suspicion was a Mansi tribe attack, since the hikers were on native land. But this theory was dismissed. There were no signs of struggle, no other footprints, and the Mansi were known to be peaceful. Some theorists point to paradoxical undressing, a known effect of hypothermia, where victims start feeling hot and remove their clothing. It could explain why several of the hikers were found nearly naked, but it doesn't explain the massive internal trauma suffered by others. A darker theory suggests the group accidentally entered the site of a secret Soviet weapons test, perhaps exposed to radiation, shock waves, or even experimental infrasound weapons. This might explain the unusual injuries, the traces of radiation, and the government's quick, vague conclusion. Others point to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations generated by wind patterns around the mountain. These sounds, though inaudible, are believed to cause extreme anxiety, panic, and disorientation, possibly enough to make the group flee irrationally into the snow. More sensational theories include a wild animal attack, or even a yeti, though again there was no physical evidence to support this. And then there are the reports of mysterious orange lights seen in the sky around that time, leading some to suggest UFO activity or unexplained aerial phenomenon. In the end, none of these theories fully explain what happened. Too many questions remain. Too many clues seem to contradict each other. And so, more than 6 decades later, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries of the modern age. In the decades that followed, the Dyatlov Pass case was reopened several times, including by Russian authorities as recently as the 2010s. Yet, despite new technology, new interviews, and modern forensic analysis, no definitive conclusion has ever been reached. The tragedy has since echoed through popular culture. Books, documentaries, films, and podcasts have all tried to make sense of what happened that frozen night in 1959. But no story, no theory, no evidence has brought us any closer to the truth. So we're left with the same haunting mystery. What terrified 9 young explorers enough to flee into the cold, half-dressed, disoriented, and doomed? And what truly happened on the slopes of Dead Mountain? This is Echo Case, where the echoes of the past are never truly silent. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.